Aldous Merritt stood at the kitchen window of the house in Maple Ridge that he had spent 11 years building into something worth standing inside. A mug of coffee going cold in his hand. And on the table behind him, 2 envelopes, one for each of his daughter's husbands. $100 in each. Nothing more. He had canceled both men's supplemental accounts the night before. He had spoken to HR at Merritt Timber and Land on the Friday, quietly, without explanation. He had changed the locks on the company truck shed at 5 in the morning. No note, no meeting scheduled, no forwarding address for the questions he already knew were coming. Just 2 white envelopes and 7 days of deliberate silence stretching out ahead of them all. 2 sons-in-law. 2 directions they would walk come Monday. Neither of them understood yet what the week was actually going to require, and it had nothing to do with the money. Aldous had grown up in Prince George in a house that was always either too hot or too cold, depending on whether the bills had been paid. His father Lorne had run a small logging operation that peaked when Aldous was 6 and declined slowly, and without drama after that. The way things decline when a man makes one decision too slowly for 10 years running. By the time Aldous was 17, Lorne had sold the equipment, the land lease, and most of what remained of his own self-respect to a company from Calgary that didn't remember his name by the time the ink was dry. Aldous had watched this from across a kitchen table that had belonged to his grandfather and understood, not as a lesson, not as a warning, but in the way cold gets into a house through the foundation, slowly, completely, and before you notice. He had left Prince George at 19 with a used pickup, a forestry management certificate, and a particular quality of attention to detail that comes from watching someone else lose everything. By 31, he had his first private land contract in the Fraser Valley. By 40, he owned Merritt Timber and Land outright, no partners, no silent investors, no debt he hadn't paid down ahead of schedule. His wife Patricia had understood him the way certain people understand each other without needing language to do the work. She could read the difference between the quiet that meant he was thinking and the quiet that meant something was wrong. She died of a cerebral hemorrhage on a Tuesday morning in October when their younger daughter Bea was 14. Aldous had raised both girls alone after that. He did not speak often about what that had cost him. He had simply done it, the way he did most things, without announcing the effort. He had been watching both men for 2 years before the morning in February when he made his decision. His older daughter Cass had married Tyler at 26. Tyler was 38 now and held the title of operations manager at Merritt Timber and Land, a position Aldous had created for him 3 years into the marriage, which Tyler had come to treat the way some men treat inherited furniture, as something that had simply always been there and would simply always remain. He arrived at the Maple Ridge office at 8:40 most mornings. He left at 4:30. He talked about the company at family dinners as though he were describing a piece of infrastructure, something that ran on its own and required only his occasional presence to continue doing so. Aldous had noticed that Tyler had not once, in 3 years, asked why something was done the way it was done. He asked what things cost and whether they were on schedule. He never asked what they were for. His younger daughter Bea had married Quinn 2 years ago. Quinn was 32 and had been, in his own accounting, developing a mobile platform for small forestry contractors since before the wedding. The platform had a name and a pitch deck and a URL that Aldous had visited once and found contained mostly placeholder text, the monthly amount Aldous transferred to Bea's household account, which Quinn referred to, without apparent irony, as operating capital, had been increasing by small increments every 6 months, as naturally as a tide. Aldous had said nothing about this directly. He had simply watched, and what he watched over 24 months was a man who had learned that the question of what something was worth was answered for him before he ever had to ask it. He called both men into the study of the Maple Ridge house on a Sunday evening, not the office. The study with the old spruce desk that had been his grandfather's and the 2 chairs no one sat in except when something needed to be said. He set the envelopes on the desk and stood behind it and told them, $100 each, 7 days, no company accounts, No calling Cass or B for a loan, no borrowing from friends he'd consider using the family name to approach. Their phones were for genuine emergencies only. Their vehicles stayed in the driveway. They left Monday at 6 and came back the following Monday, and whatever they brought back with them was what they had. Tyler looked at the envelopes, and then at Aldous, and the expression on his face was the expression of a man trying to determine whether this was actually happening, or whether there was a simpler explanation he had not yet identified. He picked up his envelope and set it back down. He said, "This is a joke." It was not a question. Quinn was quiet in a different way. He held his envelope without opening it, turning it once in his hands the way he turned most things, assessing the angle, looking for the version of this that worked in his favor. After a moment he said, "What are you actually trying to accomplish?" The word actually landed with a weight that told Aldous his son-in-law already thought he knew the answer and found it unimpressive. Aldous said what he had planned to say. He said nothing more. He had written nothing down. The envelopes were facts, not invitations. The only actual choice either man had, the one that would define the 7 days and possibly more than the 7 days, was who he turned out to be once Aldous Merritt's name stopped being the thing that opened doors. He had wondered about that question for 2 years. On Sunday evening he gave it somewhere to go. Monday came with the particular cold that settles over the Fraser Valley in February. Not dramatic cold, not the kind that makes the news, just a low, flat gray that presses against the windows and makes staying inside feel like the obvious and correct decision. By 6, the driveway was empty. Aldous poured a second cup of coffee and did not check his phone. He had spent 2 years forming a question. Now the question was walking down the road in 2 different directions. He would have an answer in 7 days, or he would have something harder than an answer. He had thought through both outcomes. He had made his peace with either. Tyler Beaumont had paid for things his whole adult life the way water moves, without watching itself. He had held a credit card since university, had never, as far as he could recall, actually counted what was in his wallet before ordering food or calling a car. The number was always sufficient. The number was infrastructure. He called a car out of habit, muscle memory, and stood outside the house in the cold for 4 minutes before he remembered and canceled it. He started walking and walked 6 blocks before he took stock. The $100, a duffel bag with 2 days of clothes, because he hadn't actually planned for 7, and the beginning of a feeling he had no word for yet. He called a friend from university, Pete, who had a basement suite in Burnaby, and the kind of easy generosity that doesn't ask too many questions the first time. Pete said yes. Tyler arrived mid-morning and sat on Pete's couch and spent the first hour sending text messages to former colleagues, the kind of people he thought of as his professional network, and had never, until he tried to actually use it, examined too closely. 2 didn't respond. 1 asked what he was looking for. He started writing an answer and couldn't finish it, because finishing it required being clearer about his situation than he wanted to be. He went out at noon. He ordered a sandwich and a coffee at a place on Hastings Street, sat at the counter and watched himself tip $4 on a $9 meal before he'd thought about it. He walked back to Pete's with $31 and the beginning of an understanding that was not yet an understanding, just a pressure, a vague discomfort sitting where his chest and his stomach met. He did not do the math. Not yet. He was not ready for the math to be real. Quinn Barlow left the house at 5:50 with a backpack, and what he would later describe to himself as a framework. $100 was a constraint, and constraints were, in the language he had used for 3 years talking to anyone who would listen about the platform, opportunities to be resourceful. He told himself this on the sidewalk and believed most of it. By 8:30 he had found a small business networking event at a shared workspace in East Vancouver. $30 to attend, listed online as a community investment for emerging entrepreneurs. He paid. This was what people building things did. They showed up in rooms with other people who were building things. The conversations would lead somewhere. The somewhere always materialized if you stayed consistent. He stayed for 2.5 hours. He talked to 11 people. He collected 8 business cards and gave out 3. He ate 2 servings of the complimentary bruschetta and drank a glass of water and stood near the window at various points, looking thoughtful in the way he had learned to look thoughtful at events like this. He left at 11 with $68, the 8 business cards, and the beginning of a realization that he had gone to an event hoping that being present would constitute building something. He sat in a Tim Hortons and spread the business cards on the table and looked at them and drank a medium coffee. Outside it had started raining in the quiet Vancouver way. Not a downpour, just a gray, consistent dampness that made the sidewalk shine and softened everything at the edges. He calculated $66, 6 days remaining. No confirmed place to sleep. He knew people in the city. He began working through them mentally and discovered something he did not want to discover, which was that most of the people he knew in Vancouver he knew through Bia, and knowing them through Bia meant knowing them through the merit name. And he was not willing to call any of them right now and explain why he was trying to find a couch. He found a hostel in Gastown. $42 a night. He did the math this time and did not like what it produced. He sat with his coffee for a long time after it had gone cold. Ian Merritt, Aldis's brother, 11 years his junior, had a room at a community support residence in East Vancouver on Hastings Street East, the kind of address that people who live there call their address and people who don't avoid saying out loud. He ate most mornings at a drop-in 2 blocks away, a small operation out of a church annex that served breakfast to whoever walked in. No registration, no intake form, just a room and food and a kind of deliberately unremarkable welcome. Quinn found the place by accident on Tuesday morning after a night at the hostel that had cost him $42 and left him with $24. He had walked for an hour, partly to clear his head and partly because he had calculated that walking was free. He stopped outside the annex because he could smell the coffee from the sidewalk and the door was open. He sat at a table near the back. Across from him was a man in his late 50s in a heavy flannel shirt who ate methodically, the way people eat when they have learned not to treat meals as guaranteed. The man's name was Douglas. He had been a site foreman for a mid-sized construction company in the Okanagan for 19 years. His wife had died 3 years ago. The insurance had covered what insurance covers, which is to say it covered the piece that could be expressed as a number, and left the rest for Douglas to manage on his own. And what Douglas had managed, and what had managed him in the 3 years since were not, by the time Quinn sat down across from him, the same story. The work had disappeared first. Then the apartment lease he couldn't renew on one income. Then the truck. Then the particular way a person understands themselves when their address is a place other people lower their voices to mention. He told Quinn some of this, and not all of it. He described it the way you describe something you have moved through, and are not finished moving through, steadily, without embellishment, and without asking for anything in return except that the person across from him pay attention, which Quinn did. Douglas had been a Finnish carpenter on the side for 20 years, mostly furniture, small commissions through word of mouth, the kind of craftsmanship that builds a reputation slowly, because the reputation is built by the objects themselves. He had not made anything in 14 months. His hands rested on the table in the way hands rest when they have not been given work to do for a long time. Quinn did not fill the silences. He was not by temperament someone who sat with silence easily, but he sat with this one. When they finished eating, he wrote one thing in the margin of the hostel receipt he found in his jacket pocket. It's not a pitch deck. It's a door. By Tuesday night, both men were in different kinds of difficulty. Tyler had spent 3 more days on Pete's couch, going out each morning with the intention of finding work and returning each evening without having found it. Not because work wasn't available, but because the work that was available. Kitchen prep, warehouse unloading, a sandwich board position outside a mattress store, was work that Tyler had approached and then not entered, circling each opportunity at a distance he could not fully explain to himself and could not reduce. He had $11 left by Thursday morning. Pete had said nothing directly, but the apartment had a particular quality of occupied silence that Tyler recognized from 2 years of reading work sites. The kind of quiet that means someone is waiting for you to understand something then said not to say. He called Aldous on Thursday afternoon. Voicemail. He called again. Voicemail. The third time he did not plan what he was going to say, and so what came out was not performed, not managed into a recognizable shape. He said, "I don't know what I'm supposed to be learning from this." He paused. He said, "I think I've been showing up to a job I never actually earned, and I don't know what I'd be without it." He didn't finish the sentence. He held the phone after he hung up and sat with what he'd said. He sat for a long time. Friday morning, Tyler walked into a diner on Kingsway called Belmont's that had a handwritten sign in the window. He pushed the door open and asked for the manager and said he could wash dishes, clear tables, run food if they needed, whatever they had. He said it plainly, without preamble. The manager, a compact woman named Sylvia with the focused efficiency of someone who had run a short-order kitchen for a long time, looked at him for 3 seconds and said, 6 to 2, starts now. He took off his jacket and started. What happened over the next 2 days was not dramatic. He washed dishes. He wiped down the counter at the end of service. He carried plates to tables without being asked to remember anything more complicated than the order and the face. On Saturday afternoon, a man at the corner booth left a newspaper behind, and Tyler picked it up and didn't read it, and put it in the recycling and went back to the kitchen. And somewhere in the motion of that small, unremarkable act, something in him shifted, not dramatically, not with any particular announcement, just a small, quiet settling, like a joint finding its place. He had spent 3 years being the operations manager. He had never asked what the operation was actually for. Quinn spent Thursday in a worse position than he had spent Wednesday in, which was already not good. He had moved out of the hostel after 2 nights because the math would not work, and had spent Wednesday night in the common area of a community center that opened its doors after 9 to people who needed somewhere to be. He had 60 cents in his pocket Thursday morning, and Douglas's coffee schedule memorized from 2 days of arriving at the church annex at the same time. Douglas mentioned Thursday afternoon without presenting it as an offer, that the residence where he stayed had a small workshop in the basement that the building manager let residents use on Tuesday and Thursday evenings. He mentioned it the way people mention things they are not sure are relevant, briefly, in passing. He said there was a table saw and a decent set of hand tools and a pine board he'd been meaning to do something with for 3 weeks. He said this and looked out the window. Quinn said, "Show me." What Douglas built that Thursday evening in the basement workshop of the Hastings Street residence was the beginning of a wall-mounted key holder, simple construction, 3 hooks, routed edges. He worked with an unhurried precision that came from 2 decades of knowing that the thing you skip in the first step is the thing that costs you in the last. Quinn stood beside him and did not pretend to know what he was looking at when he didn't know. He asked questions. Douglas answered them the way craftsmen answer questions, by demonstrating rather than describing. When they stopped at 9, the piece was not finished. But the beginning of it existed, and the beginning was sound. Douglas looked at it for a moment, and then looked at his hands. And what was in his face in that moment was not happiness exactly, just a particular quality of recognition, the way a person's face changes when they have been reminded of something true about themselves that they had spent too long doubting. Quinn wrote 2 things that night on the back of the hostel receipt. He doesn't need materials. He needs a reason to use them, and underneath, that's what the platform should do. Thursday night, all 4 of them, Tyler and Quinn on their different sides of the city, and Aldous in the Maple Ridge house, and Douglas in the residence on Hastings, arrived at something. Not answers, not resolutions. Just the clarity that comes when you have stripped away everything that was standing between you and the actual question. Tyler sat in Pete's apartment and looked at the $11 he had left, and thought about 3 years of arriving at a job he had walked into through a door someone else built. The thought arrived without accusation, just as a fact. A piece of geography he had been inside for a long time, and was only now, from the outside of it, able to see. Quinn sat in the community center and looked at the ceiling, and thought about the pitch deck that lived in a folder on his laptop, and had not changed in 18 months, except for the date on the cover page. He thought about Douglas's hands on the table saw. He thought about what it meant to build something that held weight. Aldous stood at the kitchen window with cold coffee and thought about the question he had been carrying for 2 years. He did not know what the answers were going to look like. He knew what he hoped they contained. Douglas slept with the key holder unfinished in the workshop 2 floors below and dreamed, for the first time in 14 months, about work he had not yet done. Friday came gray and cold, and both men moved differently in it. Tyler arrived at Belmont's at 5:50 and found Sylvia already inside prepping the line. She gave him a look that was not warm and was not unwelcoming, just the level, direct attention of someone who noticed whether you showed up when you said you would. He tied the apron strings behind him and got to work. At noon, she put a plate on the pass for him without comment. A club sandwich, a bowl of soup, a coffee that she refilled once without being asked. He ate standing at the end of the counter because there was no logical place to sit, and because standing felt right, felt connected to the room in a way sitting down would not have. He thought about what Merit Timber actually did, not what its quarterly margins looked like, not what its operational efficiency rate was against sector benchmarks. What it did, trees that came out of the ground and became structural components of buildings where people raised their families and ran their businesses and sat in their kitchens at midnight, wondering what came next. He had managed the logistics of that for 3 years without once thinking about the buildings. He was back Saturday morning at 5:50 and Sunday too, and by Monday he had worked parts of 4 days and earned just over $90 and spent $14 on food because Sylvia put things on the pass at noon without calling it generosity, and he had learned to accept things that were offered without calculating their angle. Quinn spent Saturday at the church annex with Douglas and said nothing for the first hour except to answer direct questions. He had 40 cents left and had eaten a bowl of oatmeal at the drop-in and was drinking a coffee. Douglas had bought him with the small amount Douglas had, which Quinn understood was not a small amount under the circumstances, and which landed differently than money usually landed. In the afternoon, Quinn asked if he could help with the key holder. Douglas showed him how to hold the router. He held it wrong the first time, and Douglas corrected him without comment, just adjusted his grip from behind and said, "Now follow it." He followed it. The edge came out clean. When it was done, Douglas turned it over and used a carpenter's pencil to write 2 letters on the back. DR. He set it on the workbench and looked at it the way you look at something that has taken longer than it should to exist. Not with pride, exactly. With relief. Quinn said, "The platform I've been building, it's supposed to connect independent contractors with clients." He said it carefully, like a person who has finally found the right order for words they have been carrying in the wrong order for a long time. What I've been building is the wrong version of it. He looked at the key holder. It should connect people like you with workshops like this, matching tradespeople in transition with community space and short-term commissions. Not an app for corporate procurement, something that starts here. Douglas looked at him. He did not respond immediately. He picked up the key holder and turned it over and set it back down and said, "That's not a platform, that's a service." Quinn said, "Yes." Douglas said, "Those are different things." Quinn said, "I know." Monday morning came clear and cold, a February morning in the Fraser Valley with a line of light just beginning to show above the mountains to the east. Aldous opened the gate at 6. He made a pot of coffee and put out 3 cups without thinking about whether 3 was the right number. Tyler arrived at 9:20. He came through the front door with his duffel bag and set it on the floor by the stairs and stood in the entryway and looked at his father-in-law. He did not, for the first time in 3 years, greet Aldous with the slightly elevated ease of a man who is confident he is welcome. He stood in the doorway and said, "I want to talk about what I'm actually doing at the company, not the title. What I'm doing." Aldous looked at him. He said, "Go, get cleaned up, we'll sit down after." Tyler went upstairs. Aldous listened to the sound of the shower running for a long time and stood in the kitchen and thought about the particular cost of arriving at the truth late, and what it meant that a man had arrived there anyway. Quinn came in at 11:40. He set 3 things on the kitchen table. The first was 40 cents in coins, arranged in a neat stack. The second was the hostel receipt, folded once, with writing on the back. The third was a business card that said Douglas Ray, Finnish carpenter, in handwritten block letters on a piece of cardstock Douglas had cut from a cereal box. Quinn's hands were open on the table, not in his jacket pockets. Not moving to his phone, he said, "I need to show you something I've been building wrong." Aldous looked at the card. He looked at the receipt. He read what was written on the back slowly and more than once. He said, "Who is Douglas Ray?" Quinn told him. He told him about the annex breakfast and the workshop and the key holder and the routed edge and the DR carved into the back. He told him what Douglas had built for 19 years and what had been taken from him and what had not been taken and could not be, which was the ability to read a piece of wood and know what it wanted to become. When he finished, Aldous sat with the card for a moment. He turned it over. The back was blank. He turned it face up again and left it on the table. He said, "The platform you've been describing for 2 years, what's it actually missing?" Quinn said, "The people. I built the architecture around a problem I read about, not a person I met." Aldous said nothing for a long time. He set his coffee cup down on the table next to Douglas Ray's card. He looked out the window at the yard, at the February light on the frost still sitting on the grass, and somewhere inside the looking he arrived at something. He had planned this week. He had spent 2 months arranging it. He had prepared himself for the outcomes, both of them, the one he hoped for and the one he was prepared to live with. He had not prepared for Quinn. Of the 2 men, Quinn had seemed to him the more insulated from reality, the more committed to a version of himself that floated above contact with actual consequence. He had spent 2 years watching Quinn describe a product that had no users to a father-in-law, whose money made users unnecessary. And now he was sitting at a kitchen table in Maple Ridge with 40 cents and a cereal box business card, and a sentence about a person he had met. Aldous felt something move in him, the way things move when you have been waiting for evidence, and it arrives in a form you didn't build space for. He drove both men to East Hastings the next morning. He did not tell them where they were going. They rode in the back of the truck with their knees nearly touching and said almost nothing, each of them still somewhere inside the week, still finding their way back to the regular shape of themselves from whatever shape 7 days had required. He stopped at a lot on the corner of Hastings and Clark. Chain link fence on 3 sides, a low building, boarded windows, gravel parking, a sign on the fence with city permitting information. He got out of the truck and both men followed. He told them he had optioned this building 18 months ago and told no one. Not his daughters, not his accountant, not either of the 2 men standing beside him in the cold. He told them what he intended to build: a ground floor workshop, 4 trade stations, electrical, carpentry, finish work, general construction. Equipment donated and purchased. Space available at no cost to people in transitional housing who could demonstrate a skill or the will to learn one. Above the workshop, 22 affordable rate apartments, rents fixed by covenant, not subject to market pressure from the surrounding neighborhood. The building would not produce a return on capital in the conventional sense. It was not designed to. It was designed to give people who had lost the infrastructure of a working life a place to rebuild it. He looked at both of them and said the same thing he had said in the study on Sunday evening, with the same level voice. "I didn't take your resources away to punish you. I did it to see whether either of you could find what I've been looking at for 2 years. He paused. "What would you build here?" Tyler answered first and answered well. Permit sequencing, contractor coordination, a phased construction timeline with realistic cost milestones. It was technically correct and had the shape of a real plan. He heard it leaving his mouth and heard the thing it was missing, and he stopped before the end. He looked at the boarded windows and the gravel lot and the chain-link fence and did not try to fill the space with more words. He looked at Aldous and said, I'd need to understand what the building is for before I could tell you what it needs. It was the first time in 3 years Tyler had told Aldous something he didn't already know. Quinn looked at the lot for a long time without speaking. He looked at the boarded windows, the low ceiling line of the building, the chain link, the corner of Hastings and Clark with its morning foot traffic, and the particular energy of a block that has been through several versions of itself and is midway through another. He said, "The workshop needs a coordinator. Someone who knows what the people coming in actually need before they walk through the door. Intake, skills assessment, matching people to the right station." He picked up a piece of gravel and turned it in his palm. "And a way to connect the things they make here to buyers who understand what they're getting." He set the gravel down. "That's what I should have been building." He looked at Aldous. Douglas Ray should be running the carpentry station. Aldous had been waiting for many things over the course of 2 years. He had not been waiting for that sentence, delivered with that specificity, about a man his son-in-law had known for 5 days, and had thought to bring into the building the way you bring a load-bearing element, not as a concept, not as a category of person the program was designed to serve, but as a specific human being with a name and a location and a skill and a reason to be exactly here. He stood on the gravel lot in the February morning and said nothing for a long time. Then he said, "How do we reach him?" Quinn said, "I know where he eats breakfast." The building opened on a Wednesday in September. There was no ribbon. There was no press. Aldous Merritt did not like events that announced themselves before they had done anything worth announcing. Douglas Ray arrived before anyone else. He came in through the side door with a canvas tool bag over one shoulder that Aldous had left for him the week before. New tools, good ones, chosen without comment and without ceremony, because Douglas had not said he needed them, and Aldous had understood that this was precisely why they should be given. Douglas set the bag on the workshop table and unzipped it slowly and took each tool out one at a time and set it in a line on the bench. The room smelled like new lumber and linseed oil and the clean particular readiness of a space that had been built for work and was about to meet it. He turned the lights on. He pulled the stool out from under the bench and sat and looked at the tools in front of him for a while without touching them. Then he reached into the canvas bag one more time and took out the small key holder, 3 hooks, routed edges, DR, carved into the back, and set it on the corner of the bench where the light came through the high window. Evidence, not of loss, of return. Tyler went back to Merritt Timber and Land in a different form. He proposed to Aldous, privately in the study at Maple Ridge, a restructured version of his role. Less title, more accountability, a direct connection to the field operations he had been managing at a distance for 3 years. He asked to spend 2 days a month with the crews, not supervising, working. He said this simply, without dressing it up. Aldous said yes with the same economy. He still wore the same jacket to work. But he drove himself now, and he took different routes on different days, not for any productive reason, just because the city was larger than his previous version of it had held for, and he was still finding its edges. Quinn spent 4 days a week at the Clark Street building for the first year. Running the intake program he had spent the autumn designing from scratch, not from a template, not from a model he had read about, but from conversations in church, annex breakfasts, and hostel common rooms, and one Thursday night in a basement workshop where a man had corrected his grip on a router and said, "Now follow it." When people asked what he did, he said he worked at a building in East Hastings that helped people get back to work. When they asked him to say more, he said, "Come see it." Douglas ran the carpentry station. He taught the way he built things, without wasted motion, with an understanding that how you measured mattered as much as what you made. He put his hand over a student's hand to correct the angle, and then stepped back and said, "Now read it." Every piece of furniture that left the workshop had 2 letters on the underside of the frame. By October, the wait list for the apartment floors had a 6-month backlog. The workshop had 11 regular participants and a Saturday open session that filled within 2 hours of being posted. Aldous drove out to the building on a Thursday morning alone. He parked on the street and sat in the truck for a while before going in. He went in through the side door, the same door Douglas used, and stood in the workshop with the smell of the work around him, cut wood and oil, and the dusty, clean warmth of a room where tools were used every day. On the bench at the end of the room, a small cabinet in progress, joined at the corners with mortise and tenon in the old way. Each joint fitted without adhesive because the fit itself was sufficient. He ran his hand across the top surface, even, the grain showing through the finish the way wood does when nothing has been done to it except to let it be what it was. He drove back to Maple Ridge and sat in the study at his grandfather's desk and opened the side drawer and took out two things. A photograph of Patricia, taken in the kitchen of their first house in Abbotsford, before either daughter was born, the light coming through the window behind her the way light comes through windows in the morning, when there is nowhere to be yet and nothing to prove. And beside the photograph, a key, small, brass, a tag on the ring with a room number, written in Douglas Ray's careful block letters, the key to the workshop he had asked to have a copy of, which Aldous had given him, without explaining that it was the first key with his own name on the tag, since he had handed in his foreman's keys 19 months ago. Aldous set them on the desk and looked at them together for a moment. Then he put them both back, gently, closed the drawer, and sat in the quiet study while the light came through the western window, the way light comes in the Fraser Valley in early fall. Slow and golden, taking its time, the way things take their time when they have somewhere to arrive and are not in a hurry to pretend they are already there. He had built a company from nothing because he understood at the marrow level what nothing felt like and was not willing to return to it. He would keep building, but what he was measuring now could not be expressed in board feet or per acre yield, or the quarterly margin reports that still landed in his inbox every Friday at 9. It was measured in a man who had arrived early because the work was worth arriving early for. It was measured in a son-in-law who had stopped mid-sentence and looked at his own hands. It was measured in 5 words said on a February morning on a gravel lot. I know where he eats. Aldous closed the drawer. Outside the window, the Fraser Valley light moved west across the trees, and the long field still carrying the last of the season's color, unhurried, full of the particular quiet of things that have done their work and are resting into what comes next. On the bench in the workshop on Clark Street, Douglas Ray picked up the mortise chisel and set it square to the line he had drawn an hour ago. He did not rush the placement. He had learned a long time ago, and had spent 14 months forgetting, and was learning again, that the steadiness of the first cut determined everything that followed. He set the chisel, he checked the angle, he checked it again. Then he drove it home, clean and true, and the wood opened exactly where it was meant to.